don't assume there is, you have to be able to do everything in order to be able to have kids. Just, I think, try and do all the planning that you can so you've got some security, and know that, if life changes, you can be flexible and you can make it work.
This episode is sponsored by Saxo Markets. Welcome to the Investing Insiders podcast, where we help you achieve financial well-being by making smarter money decisions. I'm Brianne.
And I'm Antonia.
And in today's episode, we'll be digging into a shocking financial penalty setting mothers back tens of thousands of pounds when they start a family. Joining us today is personal finance expert Sarah Coles. Sarah is head of personal finance at Hargreaves Lansdown, and she holds over 20 years of experience in the finance industry, covering breaking news affecting your money. She also co-hosts the Switched On Money podcast. Sarah, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us. Now, the figures we're digging into are pretty startling. They come from the Office for National Statistics, and they've revealed somewhat of a penalty when it comes to mothers starting a family. So how much are mothers looking at losing in terms of earnings when they choose to start a family?
So the figures are actually really striking. So in 5 years after having your first child, a woman's earnings will fall an average of 42%, or that's roughly just over £1,000 a month. And that's compared to what they were making the year before they had kids. So over 5 years after having your first child, on average, you lose over £65,000. After your second child, you lose over £26,000. And after a third, it's £32,000. So those are really huge sums of money that women are missing out on. Now, obviously, in the first year, a lot of that happens. So obviously, when you're taking some parental leave, your pay will drop, but it doesn't end there. There is a continued effect after you've gone back to work.
Yeah, those are some pretty big figures and, are quite startling when you hear them and I guess see them on paper. In terms of what contributes to that loss of earnings, obviously taking time out of work is something that would affect your earnings potential. Were there any other factors that came up that also impacted this?
Yeah, so when obviously in the parental leave stage, your what you get from parental leave will change, will depend enormously on what your employer is offering. But even the most generous employers are not offering you full pay. So statutory maternity pay is 90% of your average weekly earnings for the first 6 weeks. After that, it's either 90% of your average weekly earnings or £187.18, whichever is lower out of those. Now, that's for the next 33 weeks, which takes you up to 6 months. And then you can take an additional 6 months without pay. So if you're taking the full taking a full year, then that does mean a massive cut in your pay. But I think the lingering effects are really clear, because a lot of women will actually kind of move into either part-time work or flexible work after they've had children. And as a result, that means taking a bit of a pay cut. And it's not just really the sort of, you're working fewer hours, you get paid less. There are those other subtle differences that if you're not sort of present in the office at the same time as your boss is, the chances are that you're going to miss out on some key things like promotions and pay rises. And that's one of the ways in which that effect can really continue throughout your career.
But when you say not present, do you mean in terms of when you're on maternity leave, or are we talking about not present in terms of going back to work and not being able to fulfill the same number of hours as people who aren't in your position?
So it's really a matter of bodies in the office. So you can be working flexibly, you can be working your full hours. But for example, some people will work kind of school hours. So they'll kind of take kids to school, go to work, do the working hours, pick the kids up, put the kids to bed, and then work on. So they're working those full hours, but they're not seen to be in the office in those full hours. And, it's technically possible for managers to learn how to manage people in that way and to look at their output rather than their input. But that is a really big step change culturally for a lot of businesses and a lot of people. And so as a result, it does mean that women in particular are really missing out when they're taking that flexible work.
Okay. This is the thing is with this is that being productive and being seen in the office are two very different things. And in my experience with working mothers, they actually work harder than the people who might be swanning about in the office. Because they're experienced, they've got masses to prove, they've got people relying on them. There's a lot at stake for working mothers. So they tend to be and this is just my experience, they do tend to be incredibly hard workers. And I think often quite an untapped resource Would you agree with that, Sarah?
Yes, I mean, you talk to people, particularly people who do things like job shares. So people might sort of be sharing a job, and technically between two people they're doing one job, but in terms of output they're getting through roughly the same amount of stuff as two full-time people, because they're so committed, they're so keen to show that they're still contributing to the organisation, that they're actually going above and beyond. And it's, you can always look at the flip side. I mean, the fact that paternity leave is so short. You get 2 weeks off. You've got people who've been on paternity leave who still aren't sleeping, more than about 35 seconds a day, are wandering around the office like zombies, and yet they're treated as being in the office, present, and therefore, working. So, I mean, I'm sure those people would would say they've also got the rough end of things because they're expected to be there. But I think it demonstrates how, presenteeism is really not the way to try and run a business after people have had children.
Yeah, it seems that there's a bit of a shortfall between looking at presence and looking at productivity. So, I mean, that seems like a really bad way to measure how people are, performing in the workplace and, remunerating that appropriately. This is quite old school, I would say.
Very much so. And I think during the pandemic, a lot of people thought everything is going to change. We had parents, women and men working from home. Everybody could see how much, there's a lot of hidden work that goes on in households. Everybody could see it all. Everyone was getting stuck in and people were doing their bit. And there was a really sort of strong feeling amongst parents that this was going to be a step change. And so I think a lot of the talk about returning to the offices and, therefore you've got to specifically ask to work flexibly and be treated like a person who's being done a favour, rather than you're just one of everybody and you're all working flexibly. I think that really marks parents out for sort of being penalised financially in a way that didn't really need to happen. I think a lot of businesses saw during the pandemic that actually everyone works fine when they're working flexibly, and they hugely advance, they benefit from it, so they really commit to the business. So it does seem like a huge backward step, and it's very hard to see exactly how this benefits particularly parents.
So now that you've mentioned the pandemic, was any analysis done during that time to see if there was any difference in these figures?
So the analysis that was done during the pandemic wasn't around pay and the differences in pay. The analysis was about the level of work people do. So it looked at how people spend their time, women and men, and it showed that, yes, women still tended to carry the bulk of all the unpaid labour, so all the housework, all the children, all that sort of thing, but men took a lot more of it on. So I think it's one of the things that's always interesting is that, we like to think that as a society we're sort of moving on and, there's sort of sharing out of different roles. But then when you sort of starkly look at how many hours women spend in childcare and in housework, it shows that there are still some cultural norms that just haven't shifted.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I really agree with that. And I will hark on to anyone that will listen about this, because I believe that we're in a period of time where we've come out of that sort of 1940s housewife type role, and women are going into the workplace a lot more to have really long careers, which, they're going to do throughout their lifespan, as well as having children. Division of tasks within the household hasn't kept pace with that. So women are still doing, and I mean, this is true of the women that I know, we're still doing the majority or the bulk of the housework and the bulk of the child rearing. And we're still organising doctor's appointments for the kids and who's going off to their piano lesson and all of this sort of thing. But we're still expected to have the same career with the same level of pay as men, or at least strive to do that. And the mental load on women is becoming, I mean, most of the women I know are absolutely exhausted.
Yes, you're right. And it doesn't stop there. So women are not just expected to sort of pick up the bulk of all those things, but also when our parents get a bit older and they require care, it's women who are expected to pick up the bulk there. And part of that is couples sort of sitting down, doing the maths and saying, well, if, for example, the wife had a career break around children, she might be earning less. Mathematically, it makes sense for them to stop work because the household loses less pay. But actually, in a lot of the cases, it's not to do with the maths, it's to do with the cultural expectations. It's why we talk about this sort of good daughter penalty, where women take either years out of the workforce or they have to work part-time in order to support their parents. So it's kind of, it's a very miserable thing to say, but it is something, these are penalties that just, once you hit child age, it just keeps going. There's no end to which the ways in which your income can be affected by caring responsibilities.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose women are seen as more nurturing in general, even though that's often not the case. But yeah, the perception is that women are more nurturing, which is why they're nurturing the parents and they're nurturing the children, and then you reach a time in your life where you've taken this break to have children, and you've had to claw your way back from that, as we've seen from the from this analysis. And it's quite hard work to do that. But then you reach a stage in your life where you've got teenagers and you've got ailing parents, and you're the nurturing woman, but you've got this massive career, and you then have to bring in teenagers, which, oh my God, don't even get me started. And, and then aging parents into the mix. And you end up with this ridiculous mental load that I see a lot of women struggling with. And you can't take your foot off the gas because you've been through this period where you've been penalized for having children, and you've managed to claw your way back from there. And so you can't slow down, and it's an exhausting process for women at the moment.
It is, and I mean, one of the things that is quite interesting in terms of caring and being nurturing is that the group of men who have to do a lot of caring tend to be those who are older and looking after their partners. So when women become unwell, the main person who will be their carer will be their partner or husband. And it's strange that we're expecting men to be caring and nurturing at that point. At that point, it's all right. At that point, men have to sort of, give up work earlier than they planned to, or, take all the responsibilities on. And it's, in many ways, that's totally unfair on them, because they might have wanted to have all these caring responsibilities before, or it might come as a complete shock to the system when you're suddenly in your 60s and suddenly you've got to become this person who does all these things that you never thought about before. So it's this weird world in which, there is an exception to the rule, in which a lot of men have to give up work for caring responsibilities, but just in those very specific circumstances, whereas, women give it up for a lot more.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to come down too hard on men, because actually they haven't got it easy either, because there is still that old perception that men must provide. And I think that is still very much alive, and men who aren't fulfilling that can feel a little bit sort of inadequate. There is a shift. I've seen a shift, and some people, you get more stay-at-home fathers, or, that sort of role now. But generally speaking, it's not, there's no balance there.
No, and it's going to be interesting what happens with the next generation. So I've got a teenage son, and he has spent some time in the manosphere, or whatever you call the sort of toxic internet, where men talk sort of, alphaness to one another. And that sort of chat is all about being a provider. It's all about kind of demonstrating your worth to, your wife and the wider world by what you earn. There's a huge focus on that. And I think it's so much harder for men who don't want to take the total responsibility for, earning all the money. They want to share the responsibility. They want to share all the caring. And then there's suddenly this new generation's coming along for whom it looks like it might be harder. And goodness knows how things will change on the internet in the next 5 years. Who knows, by the time these people are having kids, it could all change again. But it's an interesting phenomenon at the moment that it's kind of going back to this very old-fashioned sort of cultural split between men and women.
Absolutely. It does seem like the concept of, I think it's now the term of, trad wife, and like those traditional values, and that kind of conservative leaning does seem to be coming back into at least the social media space quite prevalently. And it does make you question the concept of balance and what that looks like within individual households, because I guess as society changes, people are realizing that what might work for one household might not work for another. So where one might have a more binary split, another might want to share the responsibilities, paid or unpaid, a little bit differently. In terms of the earnings loss that women are seeing when they start a family, what are some of the consequences that come of that in later life, potentially, when it comes to finances?
So a big part of the problem with women earning less throughout their careers is that they tend to pay less into their pensions as well. So that's one of the main reasons why the gender pensions gap is estimated around 48%. So this is because, often women will be taking these breaks and will not feel that they have enough income in order to be able to pay into their pension. So they might be on maternity leave, or they might not be working for a period of time, and they may not be paying into their pension. And so that can then feed into having a smaller pension over time. Now, for some couples, you're talking about the balance of couples. For some couples, that's part of the understanding. The man will have a good pension. They will share all their income in retirement. That can cause some issues for, maybe people who've had a more even split as they've been sort of going through life, and suddenly they've got, the woman is very reliant on the man. That can be a very difficult sort of transition. And the other issue is if a couple gets divorced, because we know that often the pension isn't split on divorce. And as a result, that can leave women entering retirement with really, really very disappointing pensions.
So is it the case that there are more women in retirement poverty than there are men?
Yes, absolutely. And I think one of the things that, people will say is, well, it doesn't really matter that you've got a pensions gap because men and women will live together and they'll, sort it out between them. And that might be the case for some people. But actually, if you're a single woman, then obviously you've got nobody else to rely on. If you are, maybe you have an arrangement where the husband buys a single life annuity rather than a joint life annuity, so that when he dies, it stops paying out. So there's a whole variety of different things that can happen that can leave women short. Even if he has a joint life annuity and it pays for both of you, so you get half the income after he dies, you also have to bear in mind that your costs don't halve. So you're still living in the same property, you're still heating it, you're still lighting it, you've still got all the same overheads in that way. So your costs aren't going to halve, but your income will halve. So there's income in retirement is one of those things that people don't put too much thought into. They just sort of basically think, on the day I retire, I will have this, my partner will have this, and between us we'll have that. And they don't really think through all the different ramifications of what can happen between now and retirement, and then what happens between retirement and the end of life. So it's worth talking that through, especially it's usually worth talking that through with somebody who's not in a relationship as well, because these are very difficult things to talk about between yourselves. And some people don't like to say, yeah, but what about when you die, to each other? It's just, it feels awkward. So just going and talking to someone you trust outside the relationship can be really helpful.
Yeah, I mean, it's the other thing that compounds all that as well is that women tend to live longer than men as well. I mean, I know it's it's a slight number change, but I can't remember what the exact figure is. But it does mean that as a woman, you do need to plan for that.
Yes, absolutely, and it's not just pensions. I mean, pensions are a massive issue, but there's also the issue of investment, because women are much less likely to invest. And part of that is that link that, once you reach a sort of particular earnings level, you become more likely to invest. So the more you earn, the more likely you are to invest, and fewer women will cross that gap. It's also to do with that insecurity of income, because if you know that you've got periods of your life where you're not earning, women may feel more comfortable with their money in cash. Now, that's a comfort, and you can understand it because on paper that's sort of guaranteed. But in reality, that money is being eaten up by inflation, and you're missing out on that potential growth. And it's the potential growth of investments that really makes a huge difference. So we know, for example, that women are more likely to have cash ISAs than men, and less likely to have stocks and shares ISAs than men. And as a result, the fact that there is a gender ISA gap, it's already there, but it's just going to grow over time because women's savings will grow more slowly than men's investments. So it's not just about the money that we have to start with, it's actually how we use it that makes a big difference as well.
I think that's a really important point to make. There's obviously that perception of risk that does come with investing. And, I guess when you know that you're going to take an earnings drop, to what extent are you willing to take that risk on? But I guess when you get more into the understanding of what investing can do, potentially there might be avenues to explore, even if, your income does change. There might be a way to still use investing as a tool to nurture your financial goals.
I was just about to ask on that, the gender ISA gap. And sorry, forgive me if I'm asking you questions you just don't have the answers to. But are we seeing any improvement on that?
So we are seeing more women invest. but we are seeing more men invest faster. So there's no improvement in the gap,
Is
but
the gap
both
getting
are
wider?
increasing. The gap isn't widening. I mean, it's so. I mean, if you look at the stocks and shares ISA, so the most recent figures we have are 21, 22. So we're yet to see the figures sort of play out to the end of the pandemic. But we know that 1.9 million men took out a stocks and shares ISA in that year, and only 1.41 million women did. So that's a difference of roughly 500,000. And it's not so much that the gap is shrinking or growing. Both, we're seeing a position where more men are investing and more women are investing. So both are shifting. So the gap is staying, but we are seeing more investors across the board. And I would expect to see that in the next set of figures, maybe not quite as striking as it was during the pandemic, because obviously everyone got very excited about investment during the pandemic, but that commitment to investment has remained and is growing more steadily now.
Yeah, I mean, some of the stuff that I've read has indicated that men just feel more confident with investing than women do, and that's sort of the main attributor to that gap. Is that right?
Well, it's something that it's for ages. I mean, when I first started reading about this, 20 years ago, you heard a lot about how women were just fundamentally less interested in risk. And that thinking has obviously changed over time as people maybe spoke to women. I don't know. But we actually did a piece of research. We asked men and women whether they felt confident in investing. And we then asked them a series of questions about investing. So women didn't do quite as well as men when it came to knowledge. They were slightly below. But when it came to confidence, the gap was enormous. So you're absolutely right. It's not a knowledge gap. It is a confidence gap. And part of that is, I mean, there's obviously bits of work that have been done on sort of confidence in all sorts of spheres. And there's that sort of very famous Hewlett-Packard piece of research where they looked at the fact that men were more likely to apply for jobs if they had 2 or 3 of the attributes they were asked for, whereas women felt they needed to be great at everything in order to apply for a job. And the same thing kind of goes for investing, that women feel they need to know everything in order to get started. Whereas men are much more likely to think, oh, well, I probably know enough. I'll just take the plunge and see how it goes. And I think encouraging more women to take the plunge, particularly with, to doing small, regular investment where the stakes are really low and you can sort of, drip feed money in and make you kind of learn as you go along. And you also develop the confidence from knowing that, it's not what you feared. It's not that everything sort of halves overnight and then increases overnight and then halves get, it's not like that. And I think it's getting that understanding from the experience that can make a huge difference.
And you mentioned that there is a sort of a salary at which you are more likely to start investing. Is that the same for men and women?
That data comes from the ONS, which doesn't divide it by men and women.
Right.
So it just divides it by the salary, and it changes over time. To be completely not putting in the podcast, but the last time I looked, it was about 27,000. But I know that will have changed a lot, so I wouldn't want to use the figure.
This episode of the Investing Insiders podcast is sponsored by Saxo Markets. Saxo provides access to a broad range of global assets through a sophisticated trading platform. You can trade US stocks from as little as $1 per trade and UK stocks from $3 per trade. Please remember that all investing involves risk. The value of your investments can go down as well as up, and you could get back less than you invest. Terms and conditions apply. Visit Saxo Markets to learn more. Looking at the figures and looking at the finances, for people thinking about starting a family, these do sound like quite startling numbers. So for those considering when is the right time to maybe take the plunge and start a family, should these financial numbers be a big blocker in that, or something that people should take more consideration of compared to in the past, say?
It's definitely something people need to look at before they have kids, so that they've got a plan. You need to kind of look at how much money you're earning and what things are going to cost and who's going to work, and kind of talk through all of that kind of financial side before you have kids. But what I would say is, I know from personal experience, I did that. I went through all the maths, and I worked out that I would just never, ever be able to afford kids. And so I thought, well, there's no good time. So, hey, there's no bad time. And so I had kids. And, things just work themselves out because you just make very different compromises, and you just try and make things work as you go along. So, for example, I moved to a whole new area in order to cut my costs, in order to make the finances work for me. So I think it's definitely worth doing the maths, but it's not worth saying, okay, there is no solution to this. There is always a solution. You just got to find what it is. I would say there is more help, since obviously now my children are teenagers, there is more help now for parents of young children, because the government offers working parents with kids aged between 9 months and school age get 30 hours of childcare for free a week. And that, having spent a period of my life where my childcare bill was roughly the same as my mortgage, you can really see the difference that that's going to make to people when they're making decisions about how they choose to work and live after they've had kids.
Childcare costs are just insane. Friends of mine who have had kids and, are grappling with that amid all of like housing costs and stuff like that, there is a huge burden when it comes down to working out how to make that work. In terms of, I guess, the level of support that the government is offering parents generally, like, do you think that we're on the right track to making sure that people can, sustainably raise families? Or is there anything else that you'd like to see be introduced, or you think that could help just, with this whole process?
Well, I think so. Having this childcare makes a huge difference. There are a couple of other things that are in place that is worth knowing about if you're in this position. So there is the tax-free childcare account, and that means that basically for every £8 you put in, the government adds another £2, and the system will let you claim. It's always very specific when it comes to the government. The system lets you claim up to £500 every 3 months. So that's basically £2,000 a year for each child, and that's for when you're paying for care for them under the age of 12, and that can make a really huge difference. To qualify for this help, though, there's a sort of a minimum earning and a maximum earning, and this maximum earning of £100,000 is one of the things that makes £100,000 such a huge financial cliff edge, because that support drops away, both the free childcare and also the tax-free childcare. Both of those disappear if you've got these earnings on a particular level. So I think there's an awful lot that has been done. There's bits and pieces as well. If you're claiming benefits to support through the childcare part of tax credits and universal credit, it is worth exploring all those things. But I think anybody who's been in this position will tell you that it's not, it's not a drop in the ocean, but it's not also, the ocean. There is a huge amount that needs to be done to make up for it. Whether that's a role for government or whether there are other things that can support people, is thank goodness I don't have to personally solve that problem. But, I think any parent will be casting around for any help. And one of the things that can be enormously helpful is to talk to other people in the same boat as you. Because when you're not a parent and you don't sort of hang out with parents a lot, you can just think, this is impossible. How on earth do you do it? When you talk to parents, they all have found different ways of making it work, and you will find something that works for you.
I mean, this is a really valid point about government help on things like childcare costs, because I had a video on social recently. It was about the 100k tax trap and the fact that you lose your childcare credits and all of that business. And I got a lot of comments from people saying, well, that's their issue. If you're going to have kids, then you need to be able to support them. Don't go ahead and have kids if you can't pay those bills. Now, the thing that people don't take into consideration is that we actually do need people to keep having kids as a society. Because if you just have old people and you don't have taxpayers, you're in a whole world of trouble. So these kind of initiatives are in place that help encourage women back into the workplace. So you then get that sort of, tax-paying sort of cycle going on. And a lot of people overlook that, and they're quite resentful of all the help that parents get. But actually, as a society, it's beneficial for all of us.
I mean, it's very much, it feels like those things where when you've got small children on trains, it's always the people who don't have children who are most cross.
Yes.
And who are sort of muttering to the person that they're with, there's no way that they'd parent like that. And when they have children, they'll be perfectly behaved. And I think it's anyone who doesn't have children, quite understandably, has no idea of the scale of the cost. So it's very easy to say you have to be able to afford it in order to have kids, without really realising how enormous childcare costs are. Who can find £1,000 extra each month? Who is that person? And please, can I have their money?
I mean, when you and I had children, Sarah, I imagined that it was quite a different landscape to what the landscape is today, because the work from home opportunities just were not there. unless you went into something completely different. So I sort of diverted into different things, because I did go back to work for a bit, and I found that the cost of returning to work was, it made it unfeasible. I was coming home with a couple of £100 in my pocket at the end of the month after I paid all this commuting and childcare and everything like that. I was like, well, this is not even worth it. But I mean, the pandemic has kind of changed the landscape a little bit in that way, although we are seeing a little bit of a reverse on that, which is a shame. But I think that there are more opportunities for people to work from home and be there as a parent, and people pick up work outside of work hours, and that's fine. We have actually got someone working for us who's just had a baby, and she took 3 months and she's just returned to work. And I'll have meetings with her while she's bouncing her baby on her lap, and she's incredibly efficient. And you would never know that she was juggling a baby at the same time. But it's nice that girls have that opportunity to have everything, really, and because we are capable.
Yes, I mean, I also, as you say, life changes dramatically in the olden days when we had kids.
Back in our day.
Back in our day. But so I had to go and work for myself, because it was the only way I could be there for the kids in the way that in the way that I needed to, because I was a single parent. But you can also understand that even when you've got these new systems, so for example, this sort of free childcare, it's only during term time, it's only for 30 hours. If you're commuting, 30 hours doesn't really cover however much you want to work. That's one of the reasons why the sort of statistics show that women tend to sort of take on shorter commutes than men. So we look at commuting time, women won't travel so far, and it's often because they're having to sort of get back for, child pickup, child drop off or whatever. But of course that in turn kind of affects that, that motherhood penalty, because it means that their choice of work becomes, well, anywhere I can get to in 20 minutes. And suddenly their choices come down quite dramatically. And unless they can work from home, it means that they might have to take a job with a lower salary. So I think there are some bits and pieces, even, with the things that sort of improved since our day. I think there's still an awful lot that parents will struggle with.
It does seem like there are a lot of things to consider and try and put into place. I guess for mothers who are currently trying to navigate this earnings loss, what are some of the things they could look to do to either, plug their earnings loss gap, or just try and mitigate it a little bit to make sure that it doesn't have too much of a intense, unintended consequence in the future?
Yeah, I mean, I think the really big one for me is to plan as a household. So, I mean, in some cases, parents won't sit down and have a conversation about it. And the risk is that if, for example, a woman works part-time, she might sort of then say, okay, well, I'll pay for the childcare out of my pay, just because they fall into that habit. And that will leave, very little left for putting towards other things. And then, I don't know, the husband might say, oh, I'll take on the bills, or whatever it is. But what will then happen is nobody's thinking about the bigger picture. No one's thinking, well, how much are you putting into your pension? How much am I putting into mine? And are we on track with it? Can we balance things? So, you can be in a position where, for example, even if you're not working, your partner can pay into your pension and you still get tax relief on that. So, I mean, it's not a vast amount of cash. It's only on the first of £3,600, but it still makes a difference. I think keeping your pension payments going is a really big deal. One of the other things to bear in mind is if you go on maternity leave, you pay. So let's say, for example, you're paying 5% of your income into a pension. You would then pay 5% of your maternity pay. Your employer would pay 5% of your overall original pay. So they are putting more in. So if you can maintain that payment, it's really worth doing. And the other thing is, if it's done through salary sacrifice, they have to pay the lot. So it makes a really big difference if you can keep those payments up. Not everyone can afford it, but if you can, it's definitely worth considering. And I think, it's just, people think, oh, that's a step too far. Maybe actually we'll just, my husband will just put more into his pension and make up for it. And it's what I was saying earlier about, actually, you need to think about the impact that will have on you in retirement. Are you happy to rely on his income? And are you confident that all your decisions will be the same in retirement? Will you prioritise the same things? Because, the worst thing could be if he has a big pension and he has specific things he wants to spend it on, and there's not enough money for you to spend on the specific things that you want to spend on, and you and then an awful lot will depend on your relationship and, how much flexibility you can have.
I think it's worth adding to that is that as soon as people do have a child, it's worth claiming that child benefit, even if you're over that 60K mark, because whilst if you're not earning, child benefit still ensures that you get your national insurance contributions, which means that you will still be entitled to the full state pension if you wrap those up. So you don't want to get gaps in that area.
Yes, and it's worth saying that you can claim child benefit without claiming the money. So it's basically, if you earn over 60,000, you have to pay some of your child benefit back. If you earn more than 80,000, you have to pay it all back. So people might think, well, it's not really worth it with 80,000, but actually make sure you claim it and refuse the money, because that way, as you say, you get those credits, and you need 35 of them, 35 years of national insurance credits to get that full state pension. You really do need those years. The only other thing I would say is, think about it when you're applying for the child benefit. It needs to be in the name of the non-worker in order for them to get those credits. So it's yet more admin at a time when no one's having any sleep, which is never good, but it is definitely worth it.
Amazing you can get anything across the line. But at that point, most women are desperate for more money because you suddenly get hit with all these costs. And you start sort of scraping around the bottom of the barrel and you go, this child benefit thing, I'll sign up to that then. So yeah, but it is just another job, isn't it?
Yes, and I would say, the other thing that when people don't tend to be terribly brilliant at is trying to think a few years ahead. So if you're thinking of starting a family, now is a great time to start saving for it, and that shouldn't stop after you have kids. The longer you can plan for things, the more chance you have of being able to sort of pay for big life milestones through your savings and investments rather than borrowing. And then, of course, you've got sort of compounding working in your favour rather than working against you with your borrowing. So it does make a really huge difference if you can be on the front foot as much as possible. Obviously, nobody's perfect. Life never quite goes to plan. So these things can sort of, they come in fits and starts. But anything you can do in advance will really help you.
Yeah. And also, one of the things I did was that I knew I wanted to take a bit of time out to raise the children and be at home, and that's not for everybody. And and I think women should do exactly what is resonates with them. But I quickly retrained so that I could do something from home during that period. So I'm so far from finance, it's unbelievable. But I quickly retrained in upholstery. And I upholstered old antique bits of furniture in my kitchen while the kids slept, so I could keep a toe in the water and keep things keep some money coming in. But that's also another option for women if they want to, because it shouldn't be that they are forced down a particular road either. And if people want to spend a bit more time with their kids, they should be able to do that. So retraining in something that you can do from home is a really good option.
Mm-hmm. And it's something we've got quite used to when people get towards the end of their career, sort of looking at that portfolio career, where they've got bits and pieces of different things they do that give them different things. Like, they might volunteer for something, they might take a short, a sort of part-time paid job. We're very used to seeing it in retirement. Actually, when you're looking after kids, that can make a huge difference as well. There was a period of time where I got a sort of an Avon round on the school commute. So when I was walking to drop the kids off or pick them up, I could then drop off these Avon catalogues. I can't say I was very good at selling makeup, but I was willing to try anything.
It's always women of a particular age who do it, isn't it? And it's just because they're just filling a gap and trying to keep a toe in the water, and basically just keeping your head above the peripheral. But it's a difficult time for women to navigate, and that loss of earnings is. I don't want to. Obviously, we don't want to put women off who are considering families, and it's still a very gratifying experience, but. As you've pointed out, Sarah, that little bit of pre-planning actually can make the world of difference when it comes to navigating all of this.
Yes, and I think one of the other big areas is it's really important to separate emotional caring from financial caring, because I think a lot of all parents will want to put the kids first, because it's your instinct really to sort of protect, and to try and separate that from the financial decisions you're making, because kids can soak up as much money as comes their way. They just will. And so it's really important to think about yourself first and think, well, before I meet all their needs, I also need to meet mine, because there will come a time, further down the line, where they're off having their lives. You want to be in a good financial position, and the only way you can do that is by focusing a little bit all along the way on your own needs. And I think it's not selfish. It's the right thing to do, because then they won't have to care for you in your old age.
Yes, exactly. And I mean, the other thing is that when I had kids, I was always quite jealous of friends of mine who had parents in the area to help. That can help reduce costs dramatically as well.
Yes. It similarly, I think maybe we just had the same parenting experiences, but yes, absolutely. I had, my mother wasn't around, and my dad was, well, he had a rule. He was no babies before nappies are over. So
that's not very helpful, Dad.
So not brilliant for the first sort of 3 years of having kids. But it is worth talking to them about the support that they can give you. And sometimes, so in my father's case, for instance, you couldn't, support them in terms of childcare. But what he said he could do is put money aside for their futures. So he started paying into a junior ISA for them. And it's contribution that, as a parent, when money is stretched, you might not be able to sort of come to, but grandparents can help enormously in that area. So it's, even if you say to your parents, please will you look after my children, and they say, absolutely no way under any circumstances, no, you can then talk to them about maybe financially helping in some capacity in order to help support you as a family. Sometimes they will just really want to help. Some of them have been sort of dead keen to be grandparents ever since they had kids, because they knew it was the fun bit.
Now it's time to dig into a few of your listener letters. If you've got any money questions, send them into podcast@investinginsiders.co.uk and we'll answer them on the show. So we have a few from different people who are very curious about how to manage money before motherhood, starting a family, and afterwards as well. So the first question comes from Sasha. Sasha asks, before starting a family, should you be financially set to take care of all the finances by yourself, even if you're married or with a partner, just in case you no longer end up sharing with somebody else?
It is a really good question. And you can see how, if you're trying to reduce the risks around having kids, how you might want to be in that position. But it would be a very rare person who could afford that. I think, if you're waiting for a time when you personally can support the kids on your own, you could be waiting for a very long time. So I would say it's definitely worth putting those sort of support plans in place, and making sure you've got things like your emergency savings safety net, and thinking about the costs and how you're going to meet them. Don't worry unnecessarily about, oh my goodness, what would happen if I lost half the income, because you just don't know what life would look like then. There may be bigger lifestyle choices that you can make that help cut your costs, or it might be that, there's help that's available from elsewhere at those key times. So don't assume there is, you have to be able to do everything in order to be able to have kids. Just, I think, try and do all the planning that you can, so you've got some security, and know that, if life changes, you can be flexible and you can make it work.
Now we're going to move on to a question from Michelle. So Michelle asks, should I still pay into my pension even when I'm on maternity leave? Now, we've touched on this slightly during the episode already, but just to kind of hone the point a little further.
Yes, I mean, I think it's worth doing everything you can to keep those payments up, partly because it's the constant drip feeding that makes a difference with the pension. It's like growing over time. Even if you don't think you're putting loads in and making a massive difference, it's that consistency that really helps grow your pension. And also, if you're paying in, your employer will be paying in and you'll be getting tax relief. So among all the things that you do, it's kind of where you get the best bang for your buck. But having said that, if you're feeling under huge financial pressure and you can't work out how to, for example, pay the bills, then obviously they come before your pension. So don't be thinking that you're letting everything go and it's all a complete disaster. If there is a period of time in which you can't pay into your pension, just make sure you do everything you can to just, don't assume it's your first port of call to ditch. Definitely kind of try and make a plan which includes your pension.
Amazing. And finally, our question comes from Holly. So Holly asks, my husband and I are looking to set up a savings fund for our newborn, and we've decided to put money into bonds. I'm wondering, is that the best way to get him started, or are there other options to consider?
So the word bonds is one of those really weird ones in finance, but it can mean loads of different things. So people use it to describe fixed term savings products. So they sometimes call those bonds. Sometimes they use it to describe sort of products put together by insurance companies, which have got a bit of investment and then a bit of sort of opaque wrapping around the outside. And obviously then you've got corporate bonds or government bonds, which you can invest in. So if I assume that they're sort of talking about the savings end of things, then you do have other options. So you can put money into a junior ISA. Now, that has the advantage of being tax-free, and it isn't available until the child turns 18. So if they want to access the money as they go along, it's not going to be suitable for that. But if you want a nest egg for when they turn 18 and they've got sort of, I don't know, I think they want to maybe go and study or buy a car or whatever it is, then a junior ISA can be very useful. And there's savings versions of those and investment versions. And so obviously if you're putting money aside for sort of anything up to 18 years, that's a decent long term in which to be considering investment. So it is definitely worth having it on the agenda. If it's sort of short term, immediate kind of, I think, in 5 years' time they might want this, or in 2 years' time they might want that, then a savings account is the right place for the money. And one good option can be to put in a savings account in the child's name, because banks are really keen to attract kids when they're young. And so they will offer really good savings rates for children. So it does both of those things will eventually put the money into the child's hand. So, in one case, it's at age of 18, one is straight away. I think part of that picture is also building up your kids' understanding of money. If they can see kind of how it's grown, the effort that's been made to help it grow, and they can understand where it's come from, they won't treat it as this big lump sum they can spend any way they want. It will come with a certain understanding of what it takes to build a lump sum and how important it is not to waste it.
Absolutely. And I guess it helps ground that money habit really, really early, which they can take on into later life.
Yes, and it is a brilliant way to teach kids about investment. I mean, my son, when he turned 18, we went off and explored all different investment possibilities. And I think now, he has a much higher tolerance for risk, being young and enthusiastic. And so he's got lots of, fabulous, he's got a Far East fund, for example, and he's, decided to invest in a couple of shares. So it's it's a really good grounding for kids then to sort of learn about how investments work and to feel that they're part of the investment world. They never have to think, am I the sort of person who invests? Because they already do.
Yeah, that's such a valid point. We do the same with our kids, and we've got them junior ISAs, and we offer to double any contributions they make so that they have a vested interest in it. And we show them the funds that they're invested in, and we explain why those funds, and we let them watch it grow. And yeah, that fact that they've put time into it and they've put a little bit of their own money into it means that they have a bit more responsibility for it by the end, I think. And when you can chat about what that money can be used for. It could go towards lifetime ISA so that they could buy a house, things like that. So it's a really valuable tool. And the government want people to start investing. They want more people investing, but they're not providing the education as part of the curriculum in order to make people feel confident investing. So as a parent, it's a really valuable lesson.
Absolutely. I mean, and I think, kids learn enormously by what they do, not necessarily always in the classroom. So I've got, one child in particular who shall remain nameless, who doesn't learn anything in the classroom.
We've all got that child.
But I think it's so important to give them those, if they've got skin in the game, they care. So if you can say, this is your money, look at what it's doing, what do you want it to do? It matters to them much more than someone with a sort of whiteboard pointing out things to them that might just, glaze over and not think it's for them at all. So it's the stuff in the classroom alongside the stuff at home. I think that combination can be really powerful.
Absolutely. Well, thank you to everyone that sent through their questions. We really hope this chat helped. Remember, if you want your question answered on a future show, send it through to podcast@investinginsiders.co.uk.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Really great to chat to you. Some really insightful things there for women navigating this space.
Thank you. It's been great to chat.
Thank you so much for joining our Investing Insiders podcast. If you like the episode, please subscribe and leave us a 5-star review on your platform of choice. For the latest money news and deals, you can sign up to our weekly newsletter at investinginsiders.co.uk/newsletter-page. We've also got a suite of guides, tools, and calculators on our website at investinginsiders.co.uk. You can also keep up to date with us on TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube. Thanks for joining us, and we'll catch you in the next episode.